I'm primarily a student of political theory, politics, and I look at the state. When I look at the state, I look at the state in its organic totality.
Welcome to our show, Kallol Bhattacherjee, who's senior assistant editor with The Hindu. This is his third book. You must be reading his analytical articles, reports in The Hindu. Kallol, what was your trigger for digging into this institutional memory of the early years of India's foreign service?
I do report on foreign affairs, I do report on foreign policy, initiatives or foreign policy developments, neighborhood policy, etc. But then primarily I am interested in the modern Indian state.
There was also some rumbling of discontent among the foreign service practitioners, say diplomats then, and the thinking within the Prime Minister's office.
Of course, those criticisms were always there. And then it also has some sort of a periphery. The attitude of some of the members of the core of the bureaucracy is always to create this conservative, establishment figure. And I think
the IFS of the time was very fiercely protective of the political leadership, and it aligned with the political ideology of the day. Do you think that in the evolution of IFS, it became a constant pattern?
Yeah, I think you have caught the right strand there, because they are not all of them, but some of them are fortunate enough to be close to the executive. And that is what makes the Indian Foreign Service very interesting to study.
What was a typical day of a diplomat, a young Indian diplomat in 50s?
So I think the Indian Foreign Service officers of the 1950s had a very difficult challenge before them, and they did not have it easy. The choices that Nehru faced were far more critical, because any wrong step could have embroiled India into sort of a disagreeable kind of a situation. But today, with whatever fluidity that we witness in the world, and also with great deal of advancements in other platforms that India is dealing with, there are far more flexibility where you don't have to really rely on just on strategic autonomy or non-alignment. There are other platforms where we have so many other channels, back channels, that are also working.
Welcome to NL Interviews. India's initial years as an independent nation was challenging, not only because of the domestic tension, domestic issues, and a range of challenges, but also how India was navigating its interests as a newly formed state, nation state, and how it was defining and pursuing its national interest in the emerging global order. To respond to this challenge, the Indian government, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, pioneered a very innovative administrative measure, that is creation of Indian Foreign Service, a specialized diplomatic cadre for navigating India's diplomacy in the world capitals as well as neighborhood, and wide range of new missions that they set up. Journalist and writer Kallol Bhattacherjee has dwelt on this institutional memory to construct those, or we may say reconstruct those times of the creation of India's Foreign Service and outstanding men and women who became part of it, and how Jawaharlal Nehru navigated this new service through the troubled times of global politics. Welcome to our show, Kallol Bhattacherjee, who's senior assistant editor with The Hindu. He has written on international affairs for a wide range of publications like Jerusalem Post, Mainstream, Indian Express, and has also authored 2 books, The Great Game in Afghanistan and The Baloch Militant in Delhi. This is his third book. you must be reading his analytical articles, reports in the Hindu. Kallol, what was your trigger for digging into this institutional memory of the early years of India's foreign service?
When it comes to, say, success in foreign affairs, it's given to the top leadership. And when it comes to setbacks and failures, it goes to the anonymous players. It's blamed on enemies or hostile powers, etc. So the bureaucracy never really figures in the scheme of things of when it comes to accountability. So I've always wondered that where does the Indian Foreign Service figure in that sort of situation. So I have always been interested to study more, and as I delved into it, I felt that I must go to its roots to understand how it was, and that's when I understood that this was actually the chosen service of the post-colonial state.
What was the methodological challenge that you faced?
My way of research is that nothing is more reliable than a good conversation.
Okay.
If you are talking to the members of a particular diplomat's family, or if you are interacting with them, in an honest, forthright manner, then one gets access to much more information than one would perhaps find in some accounts written somewhere. So I have written about K.M. Kannampilli, Dilip Kamtekar, and Cyril Johns Tracy, people like them. Of course, Meera Ishadas Malik also, and Brajesh Mishra as well. These are the people who have really had very interesting careers as diplomats. They also performed remarkable jobs on the ground. Very often they were the first in whatever they did. And that really set an example for the service later in the decades. But I felt that
was the period between, say, late 40s to 90s, early 90s, when most of them retired, is now it an anachronistic phase for Indian diplomacy with the challenges that it faces now?
Well, many of the things that India is doing today is based on the activities that took place in the 1950s, late 1940s, early 1960s, the entire Nehru era, in fact, the 17 years of Jawaharlal Nehru's government, to me, highly relevant. There are initiatives from medical diplomacy, there are initiatives of food diplomacy, there are initiatives of peace diplomacy, of course, and then, of course, the state building activity, which we have tried doing in Afghanistan in the 1980s, especially Natwar Singh and T.N. Kaul and others. They all were involved with that even in the 1988, 87. All of that, these are all state building activities that are relevant to us even today. Today, when we have to go back to, say, Bangladesh or Myanmar in the conditions that they are in, we really have to go back.
There was also some rumbling of discontent among the foreign service practitioners, say diplomats then, and the thinking within the Prime Minister's office.
Of course, because there was a great deal of disagreements happening at that time. The Foreign Service officer who was the longest serving Foreign Secretary in the history of India, Mr. Subimal Dutt, had lots of criticism, he had his points where he disagreed with the Prime Minister. The same was true for Girija Shankar Bajpai, the first Secretary General. So those criticisms were always there. But when it came to the final position that the state had to acquire, that often went to...
Like Happyman Jacob, a professor of foreign policy in JNU, wrote in the Hindu that one moment of theoretical clarity for a strategic autonomy could be that when India is faced with a choice of playing the swing state, it does not. Do you think it is a moment of crystallization of that idea?
You look at Nehru's attitude at that time. He was criticized for being soft on Soviet Union because the Soviets had sent their tanks into Hungary, just like what Putin has done this time to Ukraine. But instead of being quiet in the face of the criticism that he faced, Nehru actually called a parliament session. So the issue is not really to keep these sort of debates at the level of so-called experts and closed-door consultations. Nehru had a full parliament session where he initiated the debate on the Indian position on Hungary. And there came also the Indian position on the Suez War. What I'm trying to say is that we operate in a parliamentary democracy. And if there are issues that we feel that the political leadership perhaps is not taking the position that that's perhaps more pragmatic or more necessary for the country, then let it be discussed in the House. So Nehru actually took that position and he initiated the debate, and he discussed it threadbare in the Parliament. So the entire debate took place in front of us. It was not on the newspaper pages. The Prime Minister of India at that time. So you see, how Nehru used Parliament also to deal with foreign policy problems and criticism, etc. And he took the initiative. And his speech, he initiated the debate. That whatever criticisms you may have, because he allowed everyone to take their turns, and then he started speaking that the left has accused me of doing this and not doing that, and the right has said so and so things. So I think instead of just
a service which continued from the colonial era with a rebranding, ICS was rebranded as IAS. So it posed a danger, as you mentioned, of devouring IFS, but Nehru stood in the way.
The colonial administration was also an internal administration. Let's face the truth. And the internal administration would next happen as the Indian Administrative Service. But what was happening at that time was that the greater project, and the greater project was that for the first time, India had to speak. India had to have a voice at the world platform, because India had never spoken as an independent entity in its modern history. So that act of speaking had to be done through a dedicated cadre of service. A particular group of people had to be groomed and trained so that they could be taught that their task was going to be to speak on behalf of India. In the ancient period, we had diplomats. In the medieval period also, we had diplomats. But in the modern history, when the European capitals were holding concords and congresses, in those meetings, Indians did not participate as representatives of independent state of India. But for the first time, Indians were participating in the affairs of the world as independent voices. So I think that act was very important, and that task was singularly important. And for that, the IFS had to be that vehicle, So then
free mein itna hi milega. To watch the full unedited interview, you have to subscribe to News Laundry and pay to keep news free, because we don't run advertising. All our money comes from subscribers like you, and that is how public service journalism is paid for. All the studio lights, the cameras, all that you see on our website, it all comes from subscribers. So do subscribe, click on the subscription link, watch all the interviews unedited, and pay for public interest journalism.